It's Autism Awareness Month, and many times we look at people that think differently than we do, and we expect them to think like us. But how can we put our kids in positions where they learn to think like other people, and therefore humanize them better? We're going to talk about that next on the Celebrate Kids podcast.
Don't be afraid of the dark, be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you, baby. Not every light is gonna guide you.
Growing up, I noticed that a lot of programs for people with different abilities, people with autism, and diagnosed different ways of looking at the world, those programs pushed kids to think and act inside of a normal world. As time has gone on, we've seen that muscles, chemical balances, brain pathways are different for some people. And in that, they have a different way of approaching the world. For some parents with children with different abilities, it can be a dark place because their kids might not have the physical tools to be able to operate in the world that most kids are trained to operate in. And so today on the Celebrate Kids podcast, in our daily segment, Facing the Dark, we're going to look at this issue. How can we encourage our kids to love, care for, and befriend people who have different abilities? And in doing that, we do a better job, not only of humanizing our friends with different abilities, but also of honoring and glorifying the design and the nature of God that is evident in every person. So let's turn now to Dr. Kathy Cook. So Dr. Kathy, the MTA, that's the Metro Transit Authority in New York City, they're going to play announcements read by children with autism at subway stations across the city for the rest of the month as part of a campaign that celebrates the youngsters' deep affinity for mass transit. The public service messages will be played at 11 stations, including major hubs like Times Square, and it will advise riders to avoid littering and holding open train doors. And it's the second consecutive year that they're doing something like this to highlight Autism Acceptance Month. Now, one mother of an 8-year-old who will be reading these announcements said, quote, "It's about recognizing kids and adults whose brains work in all different ways and that they all have so much to offer that we can just love them for who they are." She goes on to say, the MTA would not be running right now if it weren't for autistic people. They are in every part of our lives. We just don't necessarily know it all the time, end quote. So, Dr. Kathy, can you explain to me maybe some of the significance of this? I mean, I feel like I know it because in my mind, I realized that we're only really one generation of time in history removed from when we were literally sterilizing people and putting people with autism in different facilities. But now we're celebrating people who kind of look at the world differently. What does this really say about society? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, first of all, let me say that I love that the MTA is doing this. I mean, it's fabulous. It shows us that children with autism can be accepted and can be purposeful and can contribute. And of course, that's true. But now for people who don't believe that, we have evidence that it is true. We're showing people that different isn't wrong, different is different. I love that. You know, back in the day, there was the phrase disability, and there were classes for learning disabled children. And that phrase is still used in some ways today. I like to say that they're not disabled, they just learn differently. Now, those are important things. And this teaches that. I love it. Different isn't bad. Different is different. They do have a different way of looking at things. How encouraging for an 8-year-old girl who, you know, has maybe struggled, where maybe things have been difficult and maybe being in front of an audience has been a bit, you know, intimidating. For her to get to do this, I mean, it's life-changing for these kids and for their families who see that they are contributing to society. It's good for us to see that.
And what a place, right? Like at the subway where there's incredible sensory overload. Even for me, I can't imagine if I was processing the world differently to be in that setting. But to have it be a place now where they can kind of speak is really super unique and super special. And I want to kind of ask you another question on this, because for me, one of my most cherished lessons that I learned from my parents is when they invited over a pair of autistic neighbors into our lives. I mean, I really learned to laugh and to joke and to talk seriously and to encourage these friends of ours who definitely thought and saw the world differently than I did. And and they express themselves very different from maybe what the norm is inside of culture. And so I'd like to ask this. What are some tips or encouragement that we can give to parents that are listening to this show that can help them teach their kids to learn how to relate better with people who learn differently and express themselves differently?
Yeah, I love that. I love what your parents did. And we can do that. We all know people from church or the community, I imagine, who are different from us in any number of ways, if not a different intellectual ability. Maybe there's something else that's different about them. And what if we made sure that our kids had experiences in the safety of our home with us taking the lead to watch how it's done and why it's done? I had two great aunts that lived the last number of years of their lives in nursing homes. And my brother and I went with our mom and dad many, many times, often on Sundays after church, to visit with both great aunt Erna and great aunt Ola. And we would, those are old fashioned names, right? Ola and Erna. And we would maybe drop off a plant or, a treat or just spend a few minutes with them. So we walked the halls and we went and we saw their rooms and we smelled the smells and we saw the people in the wheelchairs in the hallway. So today I'm not afraid of doing that. I don't have opportunity to do it a lot. I believe that when I slow down, if I slow down, and don't have as many days on the road, that is a place God may be calling me to, because I grew up and had pleasant, life-giving experiences there, actually. And I have a good friend who is a hospice chaplain who works in a lot of nursing homes and tells me of the horror that she sees and that some of the men and women experience. And maybe I can be a blessing there because of life experiences I had in my developmental years that I look back on fondly without fear. So we can make sure that our kids have healthy experiences. And you know what? We could start with books and movies. If you feel like, maybe you have a sensitive child, maybe you have a kid on the spectrum who wouldn't do well with strangers in the home, you don't think right now, and that might be okay. For whatever reason, maybe it's not wise to bring people into the home. Then maybe you start with reading the right books and watching the right movies. Maybe you go to the park and you sit on a bench and you have conversations or play a game together at a park bench, but you're on the lookout for people who look different. And you say to your kid, now don't talk too loud, but when you notice someone different, tell me what you notice. And if you were going to go have a conversation with him, what do you think you could talk about? And teach your kids how to be sensitive and accepting and aware and all those kinds of things. And what if we started making sure that kids can relate well to people like them? So, right? Like we're saying, like the bigger question, the great question, Wayne, how can we help our kids have positive experiences with people who are different? It's a great question because the world is full of different people. But if we've isolated and we're about, our busyness and our pride and we have chosen for whatever reason to not engage with neighbors and friends, then our kids don't even know how to be sociable to people like them. Maybe that's where we start.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And to close out, I'd like to ask you one more question. We live in such an efficient world, a place where education's really set up for efficiency. I mean, the lines at Disney are set up for efficiency. Everywhere that kids turn, I feel like many of the things that they see are all about being efficient. And many times parents, we can kind of be in that world of the kid that's lollygagging to say, we're not walking fast enough on this leisurely family walk. You probably have never seen any family operate like that. But if you come and visit my family, you will see many times dad saying, okay, kids, quit enjoying nature. We have to hurry up on this walk. But I'd like to hear you speak to this. How can we teach our kids to kind of appreciate that efficiency, but also to use this extra time to celebrate God's design for us in humanity? Because I think that's one of the beautiful benefits that maybe some of us will kind of glean from really befriending people who think differently or process the world differently, that they see as specialness inside of God's design. So is there any tips or any encouragement you could give to parents that can help us maybe build some of those muscles, not just to celebrate kind of the life of others, but also to celebrate God's design for us in humanity?
It's so interesting. The way that you word questions, Wayne, you're so fascinating because that's a great question. Just extra time to celebrate God's design for us in humanity. If we understand that time is a gift and we can use some of it to celebrate God's design for us in humanity, maybe we'll look for the time, right? If we feel there's nothing worth having time for, then nothing matters, we'll just do our work and be busy, move from one task to another, one book to another, one game to another, one show to another. But if we understand that there's a blessing to be known and that there's a blessing to celebrate God's design for humanity, male and female, young and old, black and white, red and yellow, all of that. Wow. Different abilities, different joys, different talents. Well, we would all be better off to understand variety. And I think God would be blessed and encouraged if we introduced our kids to his variety. And we make it about him. We make it about his desire and his plans. Yeah, that's worth thinking about.
I really liked talking about this topic with Dr. Kathy a little bit because there's a favorite verse that many will look to when they think of people who have different abilities. And that's the story in John chapter 9, where the Apostle John records an interaction that Jesus had with his disciples to explain the landscape of somebody who was born blind. And this is what the writer in John recounts of that story. As Jesus went along, he saw a man blind from birth, and his disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man nor his parents sinned," Jesus said, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me, because night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." I'm going to stop reading at that place because there's a reality here that I think can be missed when we continue reading and read the reaction of the disciples and the man who was born. So if you want to read the full story, go to John chapter 9. But there's an important truth that Jesus is saying here, and he's pointing to this reality, that this man neither sinned nor his parents sinned, but this happened that the works of God might be displayed in him. Now, as we read, it's natural for us to see that the in him is the miracle itself, the miracle that the man can come out and see naturally. But what I've seen in my experiences and where I see elsewhere in Scripture is that the power of God is already displayed in the man, even though the man has, in this situation, a disability. His eyes aren't working. He is born blind. The power of God is displayed in him already because there's a reality of his life that is a gift, and the glory of God is being shown in that. And our natural tendency is to look at the disability and let that overshadow our perspective of the man's design and dignity that he has as being somebody who is born as an image bearer of God. And I think those are powerful lessons that we can teach our children, especially as they engage with people who think differently, who process the world differently, who have different abilities. There is a truth that every person bears the image of God. And as we see Jesus interact with people throughout Scripture, he does that with love and care that shows that that person, even though they may have an infirmity, even though they may have a different ability, even though they have a different way of processing the world, none of those things take the image of God away, and none of those things inhibit the image of God from being shown in them. And as we approach the world, especially during this month, with Autism Awareness Month, Christians have a unique heritage and ethic that comes from God and is lived out in the life of Jesus and carried out through the centuries of church involvement and missionary movements that have defended the rights of those who look differently, who think differently, who process things differently. And we can live into this cultural moment with confidence that the Christian worldview has brought us to a place where we celebrate Autism Awareness Month, and we commemorate it in different ways inside of our communities. And that heritage and that ethic is something that we should be ready to share to everybody and to highlight the unique reality of what the church is doing in this cultural moment. And we hope that that gives you encouragement to face dark times today. On behalf of Dr. Kathy Cook and the rest of us here at the Celebrate Kids team, I want to say thanks for listening, and I'm looking forward to seeing you here again tomorrow.